Hey folks, my name's JR. Welcome to DIY Prepper Reloaded. If you watch gun reviews on YouTube, then you may have seen a review over this. It's the CZ75 P-01. And if you haven't seen a review of this, there's a good chance you have seen a review of its big brother, the CZ75B. A lot of those videos tend to be like first impression type things, or first mag, stuff like that. But my review is going to be a little different because I have a longer term perspective on this gun. I picked this one up around the end of 2011, so I've had it for nearly 13 years. During that time, it's been my primary range toy, it's been my main concealed carry weapon. So I've gotten a pretty good idea of the things that it does well, and then also some areas that it could do better, or you may want something a little bit different. But considering I've been carrying it for as long as I have, you can probably tell that I like it pretty good. So getting into basics, the P-01, which as you can see is safe and unloaded, has a capacity of 14 rounds plus one in the chamber. This isn't great for a gun this size, but it's okay. Mine came with two mags like this one that have a rubber base plate on the bottom. They work fine as far as reliability goes, but I prefer ones like this that have a plain metal base plate that fits flush with the bottom of the gun, like this. This reduces how much the gun prints under my clothes, at least a tiny bit, but more importantly, flush fit mags are less likely to grab onto my shirt when I need to access the gun quickly. You probably won't have much luck just walking into a store and finding CZ mags, but they are easy to find online. The only times I haven't been able to get them were when everything else was sold out too. The finish on the P-01 is pretty good. What you're looking at here is wear over the course of nearly 13 years of regular use and carry. Most of the spots that the finish has worn off on is places that you would expect, like on corners or edges that frequently go in and out of a holster. So even though it's not pristine anymore, I don't think it's held up poorly by any stretch of the imagination. Now, one thing that sets the P-01 and other CZs apart from other guns is the fact that they have internal slide rails. Most pistols like Glocks have slides that run on the outside of their frame slide rails. This is a design element that CZ borrowed from the SIG P210. The biggest advantage to this is probably a reduction in felt recoil, and I will say that after shooting this gun for as long as I have, it has very little felt recoil. The only downside to having internal slide rails is that it results in a more narrow slide, which can be harder to grip. It can be a big issue for folks that don't have a strong grip or who have other conditions, maybe like arthritis. Another thing that contributes to the P-01's low felt recoil is its ergonomics, and that's one thing that CZs in general are very well known for. They have a nice palm swell on the back here that does a really good job matching the contours of your hand, especially if you have medium to large hands. And I know that this is something that comes up in pretty much every video over CZs, but it really is something that you have to experience firsthand to understand how good it actually is. Anytime I hand the gun to somebody, they're almost in shock about how good it fits in their hand. The grip panels that it comes with are made of a nice kind of soft rubber material. They're checkered and they have contours that add to the pistol's ergonomics, but since they are so grippy, they could make defeating a garment a little more difficult if that's an issue for you. There are a lot of companies out there that produce aftermarket options, and a lot of folks seem to like them. I just kept the stock grips on mine, so I know that when I go to pull my shirt up to get the gun, that motion needs to be exaggerated. But on the bright side, I'm pretty pale, so hopefully pulling that shirt up so high will have the added benefit of blinding my attacker at the same time. No need for a tack light. I'm totally kidding there. But when it comes to shooting it though, the P-01 literally feels like it's an extension of my body. Some of that's because of the grip profile, but the way its weight is balanced is also very nice. Its balance is actually better to me than the full-size SP-01 Tactical, like what I have here. It may seem a little bit odd, but I feel like I actually shoot the smaller gun as good or better than I do its full-size brother. Now, if you have small hands, shooting the P-01 and other CZs may not be very enjoyable. The nice big palm swell that I mentioned a second ago can put the trigger too far forward for some folks. My wife, for example, is around 5'2" and cannot wrap her finger around the trigger while maintaining a proper grip. This is a really big problem on the first shot since it's double action and the trigger is set further forward than it is for single action. You can get reach reduction kits for the P-01 and other CZs though, so that's an option if you're still wanting the gun and you're willing to do that. This is a double action, single action pistol with a decocker. So when you load the gun and chamber around, you use your decocker to drop the hammer to its carry position. Your first trigger pull will be long and heavy, kind of like on a double action revolver. This acts as the gun's safety since a longer, heavier trigger pull is more difficult to pull on accident. Then, after the first round fires, the slide will cycle, pushing the hammer all the way back as it does so. This will cause all subsequent shots to have a lighter single action trigger pull until you use the decocker lever again. Even if you have to reload, when you drop the slide, you'll still be using your single action trigger. And having a double action, single action trigger has some positives and negatives. First, on the good side, it's relatively safe. The double action pulls heavy enough that you're not too likely to fire the gun if it accidentally gets snagged on your clothing. Then, since the P-01 has an exposed hammer, you can keep your thumb on the hammer as you're reholstering. If you feel the hammer start to come back a little, you know the trigger's been snagged in, you can go ahead and fix it. That can save you from blowing half of your butt cheek off, and it's even more valuable if you carry appendix because a mistake there could be fatal. There's arteries and other really important stuff down there that you don't want getting damaged. Then the single action trigger is very light and has a much shorter reset than it does in double action. That'll give you easier follow-up shots and can help you shoot more accurately at longer distances. Now you could get the Omega model of the P-01 that can be swapped between a decocker and a manual safety. That was discontinued in 2023. That's not the model I have. Mine's the original, but I'm fine with that because I'd rather have the decocker than have to fiddle with the safety in the middle of a life or death situation. The P-01 has an forged alloy frame, which does help keep its weight down, and it also includes a light rail on the front. That's an improvement over the original CZ75. Whether you plan on running a light or laser on your gun or not, I think it's still good to have options. And since the slide rails fit inside the frame, it gives you the added benefit of making a thumbs forward pistol grip a lot more comfortable. While it isn't too big of an issue on other guns, having the slide moving inside the frame keeps your thumbs totally out of the way. You just have a lot of good real estate there, and then also it gives you a nice comfy place to index your finger so you're keeping it away from the trigger when you aren't actually trying to shoot. Then another nice feature of this gun is that it has a beveled mag well. It isn't really pronounced, like it isn't flared or anything, but it is helpful when inserting mags, and as you can see here, the P-01 will drop magazines straight out of it without any help, which also helps speed things up. You don't have to do like the John Wick flick thing to get the mag out, but of course, I mean, you can do that if it makes you feel better about yourself as a person. It also comes with a cold hammer forged barrel with a polished feed ramp. That's always a nice thing to see on a handgun since it helps make feeding a lot more reliable. One not so great thing about the P-01 is that its sights are pretty stinking basic. They do have some glow-in-the-dark paint on them, but it's not tritium like what comes on the SP-01 Tactical. You have to shine a light on these sights first, so the chances of them actually glowing when you need them to glow are pretty low. It's either going to be in the middle of the night where it's already started to fade, and if you carry concealed, they're not going to be absorbing light since your clothing's probably going to be covering them up. Now, when it comes to shooting, the P-01 is an absolute gem. It's probably the most reliable gun that I've ever owned. People always like to talk about how like pump shotguns are the most reliable guns on the planet. I've actually had way more malfunctions with my pump action shotgun than I've ever had with this P-01, given my 870 was produced after Remington got bought out, but issues with this pistol have been extremely rare. I can literally count the number of malfunctions the P-01 has experienced on one hand. One was deformed, like an out-of-spec round that had, I mean, no gun would have been able to fire that round. Then there was another that was the gun's fault, but I'll talk more about that later in the video. This pistol's been able to shoot every kind of ammo that I've tried in it, ranging from just normal full metal jacket range rounds, defensive hollow points, and then even a considerable amount of reloads. Before the P-01 was released, it was subjected to some pretty rigorous testing and was designed to exceed 30,000 rounds of 9mm ball ammo. During the firing portion of its testing, it ended up with 0.05% failure rate, which is around 1 per 2,142 rounds. That's in addition to 4,000 dry firings, 3,000 decockings, and over 1,300 operator-level disassemblies, like what you would do when you're cleaning a handgun. Then the P-01's also easy to shoot accurately. Now, to be fair, most modern production pistols from good companies are more accurate than the person shooting them in most cases. However, a lot of the things I mentioned earlier, like the ergonomics, balance, and low felt recoil, help make the shooter's job a whole lot easier. And I mean, it's just a fun gun to shoot. I mean, that's the reason why I've put so many rounds through it. I mean, it's just been very fun to do that. Now, even though I love my P-01, it isn't perfect. Like any other gun, it does have some things about it that could be a deal breaker to some folks. Earlier I mentioned that it isn't well suited for shooters with small hands. There are ways around this, but if you're petite or you have a hard time pulling slides back, this probably is not the gun for you. Then the fact that it's a double action, single action will be an issue for some. While it does make it pretty safe to carry, you're going to need to master two distinct trigger pulls. The single action, I mean, it's fine. It isn't the most crisp in the world, but it's light enough that it's easy to shoot accurately. The double action trigger pull is where most people will struggle. And I'll be honest, even though I've been shooting this gun for 12 years and have shot other handguns with double action triggers, I'm still not as accurate with it as I am with the single action trigger. This can be overcome with practice, but doing that constantly is going to be a little bit hard on the gun itself. You're going to need to use the decocker between every shot, and the double action pull does put more strain on some of the internals. A lot of people, especially those who are casual shooters, may be better off getting something like a Glock 19 that just has one trigger pull. It may not be the best trigger in the world, but it really isn't that bad, and you'll only have to learn one. That'll also make strings of shots a little bit more consistent. The P-01's also a little larger than some people would prefer for a carry gun. It has an alloy frame, so it isn't as heavy as something all steel would be, but it still weighs just under 35 ounces when loaded. Dimension-wise, it's pretty similar to a Glock 19, so it's not a pocket gun, but it will give you a decent capacity and the ability to hit targets at longer distances a little easier than something smaller would. The P-01 also isn't the easiest gun in the world to break down for cleaning or inspection. You're probably going to need some sort of tool to help you, which is not ideal. The slide stop here doesn't protrude very far from the outside of the frame, and the spring that holds it in place is pretty stiff. So because of this, you're going to need something like a punch or a magazine's base plate to remove this. This, of course, could result in you scratching the gun if you're not careful. So when I'm cleaning it, I just use something like a small nylon hammer to knock it out. Another issue with the P-01 is that it is very mechanically complex. It has around 60 or so individual parts versus around 33 or 34 on a Glock. So there's a lot more with it that can go wrong. Then a lot of its parts are small and difficult to replace. An example of this is the trigger return spring. While it isn't necessarily smaller than the same spring on other guns, you have to almost completely disassemble the entire frame just to get to that one part. That includes removing the sear cage, which has itty-bitty springs, and if you don't use a slave pin to keep that assembly together, you're going to have a very, very long and frustrating day. I did that one time just kind of doing some preventative maintenance. And unfortunately, the trigger return spring is one of the parts on CZs that tend to fail more often than others, along with slide stops. Now, slide stops, they're not difficult to replace. You remove it every time that you do a field strip, but if it breaks, it will render the gun inoperable. I haven't had any problems with either of those two parts, but I did have an extractor break on me several years ago. That was the only time that the P-01s had any failures that were the fault of the gun itself. I had already shot it quite a bit by that point, and I may have dropped the slide on a round already in the chamber. I didn't realize that was a bad thing to do when I did it. It was a very, very long time ago, so I'm not sure if the part was faulty, if I contributed to it, or if it was some combination of the two. But really, any gun can experience a broken part. Even Glocks have had issues with broken locking blocks, and some of their 40s have been known to blow up when they're firing hot ammo or reloads. So, fun times on that. I do have a good collection of spare parts for my CZs since they're my primary handguns, and since I have a P-01 and an SP-01, a lot of the parts are compatible, meaning my spare parts kits can be used for either gun. Now, I covered the spare parts that I like to keep on hand, along with tools and other supplies you need to keep your guns running long term, in a previous video. If you want to see that, then click here. Or if you want to see the guns and gear that would disappear in a crisis, then click here. Thank y'all for stopping by. Y'all have a good one.